In the frigid pre-dawn light, on a frosty morning at the edge of the Siberian taiga, Svetlana Orlova, a 37-year-old woman with long chestnut hair carelessly pulled into a bun, stood at the window of her small wooden house. Her green eyes, filled with resolve, gazed intently at the snow-covered expanses of the endless forest. Svetlana had dedicated her life to protecting these ancient woodlands and their inhabitants, especially the rare Siberian tigers. If this story resonates with you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Let's continue. For over a decade, Svetlana had worked at the local nature reserve, facing new challenges every day. She vividly remembered the moment she first spotted tiger tracks in the snow. This event became a turning point in her life, completely altering her destiny. From that day forward, she devoted herself wholeheartedly to protecting these magnificent predators. Despite the hardships on this winter day, she was preparing for another patrol of the territory. As she put on her warm jacket and checked her gear, Svetlana pondered the ongoing issues. The reserve's funding was constantly being cut, and poachers were becoming increasingly sophisticated. But she couldn't allow herself to give up. Too much depended on her efforts. When Svetlana stepped out of her house, the freezing air seared her lungs. The thermometer read -30 degrees, but for her, this was a familiar temperature. Starting her patrol, she meticulously examined every detail in the snow. The white blanket revealed the tracks of various forest dwellers. A hare had scampered by here, a fox had slipped through there, and off to the side, the hoof prints of a roe deer. But suddenly, her attention was drawn to enormous footprints belonging to a tiger, and next to them strange imprints, like those of military boots. Svetlana's heart pounded. Her experience allowed her to recognize poachers' tracks without error. But these looked different, more organized and deliberate. Picking up her binoculars, she spotted an orange silhouette in the distance. Could be a tiger. Svetlana decided to cautiously follow it, remaining extremely vigilant. The snowdrifts were deep, and the frost-covered trees resembled a labyrinth, slowing her progress. After about an hour, she heard an odd sound, a low growl that held pain. Making her way through the dense undergrowth, Svetlana emerged into a small clearing and froze. Before her lay a massive Siberian tiger. Its hind leg was caught in a steel trap, and the snow around it was stained red. The tiger's amber eyes met her gaze, and in them, she saw a mixture of rage, fear, and unexpected trust. There was no time to hesitate. Svetlana, trying not to frighten the animal, approached slowly, soothing it with her voice. Her hands were trembling, but her movements remained confident. Years of working with wildlife had taught her how to handle the most critical situations. Freeing the tiger's leg from the trap was not easy, but she managed it. The liberated tiger slowly rose, limping, and headed towards the trees. However, before disappearing into the forest, it paused for a few moments and stared intently at Svetlana. This look was etched forever in her memory. Late that evening, back at home, Svetlana couldn't fall asleep. A strange premonition was growing in her heart. This encounter wasn't random. She felt that everything was just beginning. That night, Svetlana made a firm decision to find out who was behind these strange events in the reserve, and to do everything possible to protect the tigers, no matter what obstacles arose. Following her remarkable encounter with the injured tiger, Svetlana began to notice strange and unsettling things within the reserve. In the most remote corners of the taiga, where human footsteps were rare, she increasingly found traces of military boots. Locals shared rumors of strange sounds of machinery at night, like echoes of some clandestine activity. It all felt too suspicious, going far beyond typical poaching. One day, during a meeting at the reserve's administration office, Svetlana decided to discuss her observations. Her presentation, filled with alarm and concern, was met with icy silence. The new director, Andrei Petrovich Volkov, a tall and imposing man with graying temples and a piercing gaze, only smiled faintly as he heard her report. Tapping his pen on the table, he said with a hint of annoyance, "Orlova, you're exaggerating the significance of random coincidences. You'd be better off focusing on your direct responsibilities. We have serious funding problems, by the way." But Svetlana couldn't simply dismiss her suspicions. Every morning, she began her patrols much earlier than usual and returned home much later, carefully noting any anomalies. On one of these days, she was drawn to fresh snowmobile tracks leading to an abandoned hunting cabin. Approaching, she heard muffled voices and the hum of a generator. Svetlana carefully hid behind the bushes to get a better look at what was happening. Through a slightly ajar door, she spotted several men in camouflage gear. They were hunched over maps and satellite images of the reserve with some mysterious markings hung on the walls. One of the men suddenly turned toward the window, and Svetlana barely had time to hide. Her heart pounded as she crept away to safety. After taking photographs of what she had seen, she tried to send the images via email, but discovered that there was no signal. Although previously, the connection in this area had been stable. Back at home, Svetlana spent several hours analyzing what she'd seen. Her thoughts swirled around troubling questions. Why did people in military uniforms need the territory of the nature reserve? Why was the administration turning a blind eye to such obvious violations? And how did all this relate to the injured tigers? The next day, she decided to talk to Nikolai Stepanovich, an old gamekeeper who had worked at the reserve for over 30 years. The meeting took place in his cozy hut, where the air was thick with the aroma of herbal tea and tobacco. The gamekeeper, after pouring her tea into a worn mug, shared his observations. Sveta, something's not right in the taiga these last few months. The tigers have drastically changed their usual routes, and the birds are acting strangely, as if they sense danger. And yesterday, I saw a helicopter without any markings. It flew right over the restricted zone very low. Svetlana listened intently, trying to remember every detail. She remembered Director Volkov and decided to ask the gamekeeper his opinion. "What do you think about our new director? He's only been here for 6 months, she asked. Nikolai Stepanovich sighed heavily and replied, "A lot has changed since he came. They've fired several experienced staff members, cut funding for patrols. I recently saw him, meeting with some people near the edge of the reserve. Very strange characters, I tell you." Svetlana felt a chill run down her spine. Everything indicated that a major operation was underway in the reserve, and the new director was clearly involved. As she left the gamekeeper's hut, her eye was caught by a familiar figure in camouflage. It was one of the men she had seen in the hunting cabin. He was standing near the administration building, talking on the phone and carefully looking around. Svetlana discreetly took a picture, but as before, the attempt to send it by email was unsuccessful. The signal was gone again. Spring was gradually beginning to assert its rights, transforming the snow-covered expanses into winding strips of thawing and rushing streams. Svetlana continued her regular patrols, and with each passing day, she noticed more frequent signs of the presence of unknown people within the reserve. But what troubled her most was that there was no sign of life from the tiger she had rescued several months ago. One cool spring day, while checking camera traps in a remote part of the reserve, Svetlana came across strange metal structures, cleverly camouflaged to blend in with the natural landscape. These were either sensors or transmitters of some kind, but in any case, it was technology that clearly should not be in the reserve. She meticulously recorded the location of these devices in her notebook, realizing that relying on modern technology was becoming increasingly dangerous. On her way back, her attention was drawn to the rumble of an approaching helicopter. Quickly hiding under the thick branches of spruce trees, Svetlana watched as a black helicopter with no markings slowly crossed the sky over the forest and headed towards the northern border of the reserve. There, she remembered, were old geological stations abandoned back in Soviet times. That evening, Svetlana decided to share her suspicions with Anna Mikhailovna, a local journalist known for her articles on environmental issues. They met in a cozy cafe in the village, away from prying eyes. "You see, Anna," Svetlana said, thoughtfully stirring her cold tea, "something strange is going on here. These people and their equipment, they are not poachers. Their actions are too well organized, too professional." Anna listened attentively, recording every word in her small notebook. "And what does the new leadership of the reserve say about this?" she asked, without looking up from her notes. "That's the problem," Svetlana replied. "They're pretending that nothing unusual is happening. Volkov, our director, constantly dismisses everything, citing a lack of evidence." The conversation was suddenly interrupted. 2 men in sharp dark suits entered the cafe. One of them seemed vaguely familiar to Svetlana. They chose a nearby table and became engrossed in a conversation. However, Svetlana sensed that they were secretly interested in her. The next morning, returning from another patrol, Svetlana was surprised to find that someone had been in her house. Some things had been moved slightly, and someone had clearly tried to find something on her laptop. Luckily, She always kept her most important notes in a paper notebook, which she never left unattended. An unusual silence reigned in the forest. The familiar sounds of the taiga had disappeared, as if nature had held its breath. Svetlana listened, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly, she heard a crackle of twigs and froze in place. A pair of amber eyes stared out at her from the thick undergrowth. It was the same tiger. Her heart skipped a beat. She could see barely noticeable scars on the animal's hind leg, but Svetlana instantly recognized her protégé. For several long seconds they looked at each other. There was no threat in his gaze, only a quiet, almost human understanding. The tiger slowly stepped into the open, limping slightly, but holding itself with true dignity. It stopped a few steps from Svetlana. It seemed to her that an elusive connection had formed between them. Suddenly, the tiger turned its head toward the northern part of the reserve and let out a low warning growl. A moment later, Svetlana detected the distant sound of an engine. The tiger disappeared into the thicket, and she quickly hid behind a large fallen tree. Soon, 2 military jeeps with tinted windows drove along the trail, heading towards the abandoned stations. Back at home, Svetlana couldn't sleep for a long time. The thought that her meeting with the tiger was no accident wouldn't leave her. It seemed he was trying to tell her something, to warn her. The next morning, despite all the risks, she decided to go to the northern part of the reserve. She carefully packed her backpack, a compass, a camera, binoculars, and enough food for a day, as well as an old map that the previous director had once given her. Answers to her questions were waiting for her, but she still had to find them. Pushing her way through the dense undergrowth, Svetlana stopped often to listen. Sometimes she heard a sound that resembled machinery, but it quickly faded, dissolving into the whisper of the wind. After several hours, she reached a small stream, on the bank of which she spotted fresh snowmobile tracks. Following the tracks, she saw strange objects, similar to those she had encountered before, but these looked far more complex. Some of them emitted a barely perceptible hum. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to approaching voices. Svetlana instantly took cover behind a large boulder. 2 men in uniforms walked by, carrying something that looked like technical equipment. She overheard snippets of their conversation. "The perimeter must be completed by next week," one of them said. "Volkov demands that we speed up the process. The animals are leaving the territory," added the other. Svetlana, carefully stepping, moved further. When she climbed a small rise, she saw what was once a geological station. Now it was an organized camp with several new buildings and satellite antennas. She took out her binoculars and began to study the surrounding area closely. There were surveillance cameras and various sensors everywhere. Several men in camouflage gear were patrolling the perimeter on a set route. There were 3 military jeeps and a small helicopter on the site. As Svetlana watched, her eye was caught by movement among the trees nearby. It was the tiger. It was moving silently, as if studying what was happening, just like her. Suddenly, Volkov, the director, emerged from one of the buildings, accompanied by a group of people in business suits. They were discussing something animatedly, pointing at a map. Svetlana tried to capture what was happening on her camera, but suddenly the device failed, although the battery was fully charged. At that moment, the tiger let out a low growl, as if drawing her attention, and slowly moved to the side, as if inviting her to follow him. She followed the animal, which confidently led her, avoiding the cameras and sensors, as if it knew their location. After a while, they reached an old hunting cabin that Svetlana had not known existed. Inside, she found old maps and documents from the Soviet era that described places that were not on the official maps of the reserve. While Svetlana was examining these finds, the tiger lay nearby, as if guarding her. His presence gave her a surprising sense of protection. Svetlana suddenly realized that an unusual connection had formed between them, one that went beyond the usual human-animal relationship. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an approaching helicopter. The tiger tensed up and with a quiet growl indicated a narrow path that led deeper into the forest. Svetlana hastily collected everything she had found and set off after him, realizing that these documents might shed light on the secrets of the reserve. Back at home, she spread the papers out on the table and began to study them closely. The maps revealed a surprising history. In the northern part of the reserve, there had once been a network of underground structures that no one now knew about. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Svetlana quickly hid the documents and opened it. Nikolai Stepanovich, the local gamekeeper, was standing on the threshold, looking very worried. "Svetlana, you have to see this," he said, handing her some documents. Don't interfere where you shouldn't. After the break-in was discovered, Svetlana decided to act with maximum caution. Now all her valuable notes were safely hidden away. She gradually learned to distinguish even the slightest signs of someone else's presence around her house and within the reserve where she lived. At the same time, strange changes began to occur. Security personnel were appearing more and more frequently, closely monitoring every step of the long-term specialists. Nikolai Stepanovich once reported that they were planning to leave their posts, although he did not reveal the details. One cold morning, while checking the camera traps, Svetlana noticed an unusual glow among the trees. Approaching closer, she saw that the ground in this place seemed to have been saturated with some mysterious shimmering substance. Nearby lay fragments of a container with labels in a foreign language. Suddenly, a familiar sound, the growl of her tiger, broke the silence. The animal looked agitated. Its thick fur was ruffled. Approaching his keeper, the tiger grabbed her sleeve and stubbornly pulled her away from the glowing area. A few moments later, Svetlana heard voices approaching from the opposite side. At that moment, she realized that the tiger had once again saved her from an unwanted encounter. That same evening, her friend Anna came to see Svetlana, holding a stack of documents. "I managed to find something interesting," she exclaimed from the doorway. Similar cases have been recorded in other nature reserves. First, strange people with equipment arrive there, then the animals begin to behave erratically, and soon access to these areas is closed under the pretext of scientific research. Anna spread out the folders of materials in front of Svetlana, who began to study every page closely. The atmosphere was becoming increasingly tense. At one point there was a knock on the door. A man in a formal suit was standing on the threshold. "Svetlana Orlova," he said with a slight smile, "we've heard about your successes. We have an offer. Work in Canada, full benefits, a high salary, and a unique opportunity to work with rare animal species." It sounded tempting, but deep down Svetlana felt it was a trap. It was a clear attempt to remove her from the reserve. "Thank you for the offer, but I have to refuse," she replied firmly. The visitor frowned and, looking her straight in the eye, added, "Think carefully, Svetlana Andreevna. There are times when it's better to accept a favorable option than to face consequences that can be very unpleasant." After he left, Svetlana couldn't calm down for a long time. It became clear to her that the pressure on her would only increase. Stepping onto the porch to get some fresh air, she noticed the familiar amber eyes of her tiger in the darkness. His presence gave her confidence. Early in the morning, Svetlana found a strange object in the forest, a jade amulet with the image of a tiger engraved on it. When Nikolai Stepanovich saw this artifact, he turned pale. "This is a sign," he whispered. "Such amulets belong to the ancient guardians of the taiga. They only appear in exceptional cases. According to legends, these amulets connected a person with a guardian spirit that took the form of a tiger." Svetlana carefully picked up the amulet. It felt warm to the touch, as if it were alive. At that moment, a powerful tiger's roar rang out from afar. Svetlana understood. There was no turning back. Now her path was not only to fight for the preservation of the reserve, but also to uncover the ancient secrets of these places. The appearance of the mysterious tiger seemed to imbue Svetlana with a certain mysterious power. She felt its presence even when it was far away, out of sight. At times, it seemed that she could predict where it would appear next. This caused her mixed feelings. Fear mixed with profound admiration. Seeking to unravel the ancient legends, Svetlana decided to go to a small village of indigenous people, located on the very border of the reserve. It was there that the old shaman Aina lived, renowned for her deep knowledge of the traditions and rituals of her ancestors. Aina greeted her guest as if she had been expecting her arrival for a long time. In the shaman's small hut, the aroma of medicinal herbs was mixed with the light smoke of the fire. The old woman studied the jade amulet closely, as if trying to read something in its gleam, while muttering something in an ancient, almost forgotten language. "I knew you would come," she finally spoke, raising her eyes. "The spirits of the taiga have chosen you. This is both a great honor and a huge responsibility." Svetlana held her breath as she listened to the shaman. "People like you become the keepers of the secrets hidden in the depths of the forest," Aina continued. "There is something in these lands that should not fall into greedy hands. An ancient power sleeps beneath the earth. Our ancestors have guarded it for centuries, and tigers have been their reliable helpers." Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Svetlana, slightly flustered, hurried to open it. Before her was Anna again, this time with a serious expression on her face. "You need to see this," she said. "I found documents related to secret studies from the middle of the last century. Back in the 50s, they were looking for some rare mineral that was said to have unique properties. And now it seems these searches have started up again." Anna paused, looking Svetlana in the eyes, and added, "They are looking for something that should remain hidden. These stones of power sleep in the depths of the earth. If they are disturbed..." The following morning, Svetlana noticed unusual activity in the northern part of the reserve. A convoy of trucks loaded with some kind of containers was moving towards the old geological stations. Remaining vigilant, she followed them, keeping a safe distance. When a faint sense of presence appeared in the air, she saw the tiger, which was moving silently along a parallel course. Under the animal's paws, the ground vibrated slightly, and the air was filled with a light metallic aroma. The path the tiger led her on was circuitous and led to a small slope. From this point, there was a view of the clearing in front of the old station. What she saw made her heart beat faster. In the center of the site was a complex drilling rig, and people in protective suits were swarming around it. One of the containers was open, and a mysterious glow emanated from its depths. Suddenly, a sharp alarm sound pierced the air, and all activity on the site stopped instantly. Volkov ran out of a nearby building, waving his arms and shouting orders. "Svetlana, what is this strange glow?" he yelled. Meanwhile, the glow became more intense, and the ground vibration under their feet became noticeably stronger. The tiger, as if warning of danger, pulled Svetlana by the sleeve, forcing her to move away. She had barely managed to retreat to a safe distance when a muffled explosion came from the station, accompanied by a flash of a strange greenish light. Back at home, Svetlana found an envelope on her table. Inside was an old photograph of a young geologist next to a huge tiger. On the back of the picture was written, "Expedition of 1952, first contact with." The handwriting was familiar. The previous director of the reserve, who had mysteriously disappeared 2 years ago, had written it. The photo, unexpectedly found, did not give Svetlana peace of mind. After a long search through the reserve's archives, she managed to find out the geologist's name, Alexander Nikolaevich Sokolov. Surprisingly, he turned out to be Anna's grandfather. The journalist working here never shared the details, Anna admitted. She only said that these places were special, and that nature doesn't reveal its secrets so easily. Shortly before he disappeared, he gave me an unusual diary, asking me to open it only in an extreme case, Anna continued. That evening they met at her house. The diary turned out to be an old, battered notebook in a leather binding. The pages, covered in small handwriting, contained texts in the language of the local tribes and encrypted symbols. "The expedition found something incredible," Anna read. "The minerals from this area have unique properties. They react to the presence of certain animals, especially tigers." Svetlana, half listening, automatically stroked her jade amulet. Suddenly, she felt it become warm. At the same moment, a quiet growl sounded outside the window. Her tiger was nearby. "There is something else hidden here," she said, staring at the pages of the diary. "Look," said Anna, pointing to a map with markings and coordinates. "This is not far from where the work is being carried out now." The next morning, Svetlana noticed that the tiger, as if sensing her intentions, was accompanying her, moving parallel, and occasionally pointing with its paw through the trees to a certain place. It turned out to be a low rocky ridge covered with moss and lichen. Examining the stone outcroppings, she could barely make out barely visible symbols carved into the rock, the same ones as in the expedition diary. Svetlana quickly drew them in her notebook as the tiger suddenly became alert. A moment later, she heard the sound of a helicopter approaching from the west. Quickly taking cover in the thickets, she watched as the helicopter landed in a small clearing. Several people in formal business suits got out, among whom an elderly woman who looked strangely familiar stood out. "This is the place," Svetlana heard her voice say. "My father was right. The symbols point to a place of power." Svetlana suddenly felt her heart grow cold. The woman's voice was surprisingly similar to the accent of the mysterious person who had offered her a job in Canada. "There they are," Svetlana whispered, watching what was happening. "They are installing equipment along the entire perimeter. These are clearly sacred places." Suddenly, Anna and Svetlana herself burst into the room. "I did it!" Anna exclaimed. The article has already been published in an international publication, and several major environmental organizations are interested in the situation. They're ready to send specialists, but we're running out of time. A strange metallic taste appeared in the room, making everyone tense. The tiger paced nervously around the room, occasionally glancing at the window. Meanwhile, Anna took out an old scroll from her bag. This is an ancient description of a protection ritual, she explained. Our ancestors used it when sacred places were in danger. It requires a special person, one who is connected to a guardian spirit. All eyes turned to Svetlana and her tiger. The connection between them was clearly undeniable. The ritual must be performed on the night of the full moon, Anna continued. At the moment when the Earth's power is at its peak, all sacred places must be circled and the ancient protection symbols must be activated. However, there is still one day until the full moon. Meanwhile, the enemies are already starting the main work. That means we have to delay them, Svetlana said firmly. Anna, meanwhile, continued to interact with the press, trying to draw as much attention as possible to what was happening. Nikolai Stepanovich, returning from reconnaissance, reported alarming news. They are installing powerful equipment in the north of the reserve. Judging by the diagrams I managed to see, they want to create a directed energy field. Svetlana looked at her tiger. His amber eyes shone with understanding. She carefully took out the jade amulet, which was surprisingly warm to the touch. We have only one day until the full moon, she said quietly. We need to prepare all the sacred places. Anna nodded. You and the locals continue to work here. Anna will maintain pressure through the press. And we with the tiger, she gently ran her hand over the powerful head of the animal, will check what they are up to in the north. Suddenly, a strange hum, as if from the depths of the earth, came from the forest. The tiger instantly jumped to its feet and headed along a barely visible path to a small lake that had not been there before. The water in the lake had an unnaturally turquoise hue and glowed slightly. Have they awakened underground springs? Anna's voice sounded behind her back. She had approached Svetlana silently like a shadow. She held out a small bundle. This is a map of the sacred places. All places of power are connected by underground streams. Disturbing the balance in one place can destroy the whole system. That evening, Svetlana met with Anna at a predetermined location. The journalist brought important news. I found out who is funding this work. It's a large international company involved in developing new energy sources. But there's something strange. I found documents confirming that they don't have the necessary permits. They're acting illegally. Unfortunately, we don't have time for legal procedures. Nikolai Stepanovich, returning from reconnaissance again, brought bad news. They are installing powerful resonators all along the perimeter. Judging by the diagrams I managed to see, they want to create a directed energy field. Suddenly, the ground shook more strongly, strange flashes of light appeared in the air, and the trees around them began to creak softly, as if waking up from a long sleep. Look! Svetlana pointed to the mountainside. Other tigers have appeared there among the trees. They moved silently like shadows, heading toward the central site. Her tiger growled low, and the others responded to him. It was like an ancient dialogue that had existed long before the appearance of humans. It was at these moments that Svetlana realized that their goal was not just to discover a new source of energy. The far bigger goal was to subjugate the essence of these lands, that power which had supported life here for centuries, to their will. However, they were unaware of one key aspect. This power was never meant to be controlled. Its purpose is to maintain a fragile equilibrium. The tiger's roar tore through the silence, warning of impending danger. In the distance, the sound of approaching cars grew louder. Svetlana quickly hid the map, feeling the tension mount. Two powerful jeeps drove into the clearing. Volkov emerged from the first car, accompanied by security. So you are here, Svetlana said softly, turning to her companions. We should split up. Anna gave a short nod and gave instructions. Lead everyone through the back pass. Anna, the tiger, and I will try to distract them. Svetlana now felt that she had to act not just as a biologist and nature protector, but as a true guardian of the ancient secrets of the taiga. As the black jeep slowly approached the old house, she and the tiger silently disappeared into the thick green of the forest. Their path led through narrow, barely visible trails that could only be found by locals or animals that knew these places like the back of their hand. Muffled voices and commands could be heard from behind. Volkov! Find her! A commanding voice called out. And don't forget to grab those documents we have. After several hours, Svetlana and her companions reached the first sacred point marked on Anna's map. This point was a small clearing surrounded by majestic ancient cedars. In the very center of the clearing was a massive stone, covered with mysterious symbols. According to shamanistic records, such places had been used by local people for centuries to perform rituals that maintained harmony between man and nature. The tiger suddenly stopped, becoming alert. A group of people emerged from behind the trees. They were locals led by Anna. They carried ritual items and bunches of herbs, which spread a subtle fragrance. We need to prepare all the sacred points, Anna said calmly but confidently. Only the correct performance of the ritual will allow us to activate its power. Now Svetlana, Anna, Nikolai Stepanovich and Anna joined in the preparations. The atmosphere was filled with a sense of antiquity, as if the taiga itself was addressing its guardians. Svetlana clearly understood that she had no right to let down those who had entrusted her with this mission. We will do what our ancestors once did, Svetlana said, looking at the rising moon. We must protect this place as they protected it centuries ago. The full moon rose over the endless taiga, its silvery light gently enveloping the world around it. In the very center of the ancient circle, surrounded by tigers, stood Svetlana. Her faithful companion was beside her, and his amber eyes emitted a warm inner light. Anna was putting the finishing touches on the preparations, methodically arranging the ritual items in a special pattern that had a sacred meaning. When the ritual begins, her voice sounded, you must fully surrender to the trust of your guardian spirit. Only your unity will allow you to awaken the true power that sleeps in these places. Everything around was filled with a barely audible electrical hum, as if its source was the earth itself. Svetlana's tiger, which had been lying peacefully by the threshold, raised its head and growled quietly, warning of danger. Someone had installed new equipment. It had been placed along the perimeter of the sacred lands, disrupting the harmony of the ancient places. Suddenly, the world before Svetlana's eyes began to change. She saw a network of energy flows permeating the earth. These were ancient lines of power that had supported life in this region for centuries. Anna began to chant an ancient melody, which was instantly taken up by the locals. These sounds merged with the pulse of the earth itself. The tigers surrounding the ritual circle raised their heads and joined this primeval choir. The jade amulet around Svetlana's neck began to pulsate, echoing the rhythm of this symphony. They must not start the equipment at full power, Mikhail Sergeyevich said. Otherwise, the consequences could be catastrophic and unpredictable. Svetlana already knew what to do. Her many years of experience working in the reserve, the transfer of the ancient diary from Anna, and her deep connection with her tiger made her ready for this moment. She understood. The time had come to stand up for the defense of this place, as her ancestors had done. The moon reached its peak above the taiga, flooding everything around with its brilliant light. Svetlana and her tiger were carefully moving towards the northern part of the reserve, preparing for the final stage of the ritual. The process was completed triumphantly. The jade amulet that Svetlana wore glowed with a brilliant light, and the ancient power of the taiga awoke. Volkov's and his team's equipment began to switch off one by one, and the territory of the reserve returned to its natural state. The animals that had been frightened by the presence of humans once again took their usual habitats. And Svetlana continued her work, now knowing the secrets that not a single generation would have been able to unravel. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Every day we publish new fascinating stories that reveal the amazing world of nature and its guardians.